water issues for a lot longer than that. The climate and water for about 10 years.
Thank you all, and good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our Select Committee on Regional Approaches to Addressing the State's Water Crisis. Today we have some very distinguished guests that are going to highlight not just our drought situation here in California, but really looking at what other parts, not in California, but in the world, are doing to deal with drought. We have a very special guest speaker that's going to talk to us about the Australian experience with drought and climate change. And here in California, we're all in still about year 3 or 4 of a drought. We're right by the ocean. We are seeing warmer climates, and so it's important for us to see what we can do here in California regarding our drought condition and climate change, but also learning from other neighbors around the world that are dealing with similar drought conditions and warmer climates. So again, welcome to everybody, and thank you for your participation. We have already 2 very distinguished members that are here with us today. If they want to say any open comments, they'd be welcome to do so. We have Mariko Yamada from Davis and Tom Berryhill from Modesto. Bill. Okay. We have both Berryhills on our committee, so I saw the first one up from Yamada's name, and I saw Tom, so I apologize. Bill Berryhill from Stockton.
Well, I just want to, I appreciate this hearing and being able to listen to what Australia is doing. I know as a grape grower, I've watched Australia's production start to drop and seem to have come back pretty good last year, unfortunately for me. But very curious and very interested in hearing what Australia is doing with their policies, and I'm very much looking forward to as we discuss regional sustainability. I think that in California is the real key in my mind to going forward, is to develop those water supplies south of the Delta so that the South isn't so dependent on that water coming through the Delta. And there's new technologies and new things we need to constantly be looking at and monitoring, and so appreciate the chairman and allowing us to have this.
Thank you, Assemblymember Berryhill. Assemblymember Yamada.
Thank you. Very quickly, I want to thank Chair Solodio and the staff for putting this together, and all the folks that have come out today. I guess when I first got word that this hearing was going to be held, the first thought that came to my mind was this is going to be how we're all going to have beachfront property without planning for it. So I look forward to hearing the international experience. I know that Australia has been addressing not only drought but the wildfires that are associated with that, and we in California also face those similar challenges. So from a emergency services and preparedness perspective, as well as flooding and fire, I always say there are several F words involved, and we need to work together to try to solve these problems. So thank you.
Thank you. We were also joined by Assemblymember Mary Celis from Chula Vista.
I look forward to hearing the panel.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. We may have other members join us as the hearing progresses, but we did want to go ahead and get started. Again, we have some great panelists to talk about the Australia experience, but we also have individuals from California that are going to share with us what they're doing as they think about drought and climate change here in California. We're going to start off with a very special speaker because she's originally from South Australia. She has a little bit of an accent, so we'll know that she's the one from Australia. She's a professor of business and water law at the University of South Australia. So welcome, Jennifer McKay, to California.
Thank you, Jose. So I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to talk about how Australia has made a transition towards sustainability in water management laws. Now, we started this process 15 to 16 years ago, and that was in response to Rio and other types of international obligations. It has gathered some force and momentum with regard to the climate change issues of late, but I'd like to emphasise It's a process that's been going on for 16 years to have sustainability built into the laws. The laws used to read, the purpose of this law is to transport water from one part of the state to another, which is fine, but they now read the purpose of this law is to manage the water in an environmentally sustainable way, to achieve multiple objectives, which in itself is not easy, but there has been a transition, and that occurred through a political process which I'll outline. Now, just so we're all on the same page, this is Australia, and it's about the same size as the 48 states. And the Murray-Darling is the area in green, and that's where most of our irrigated agriculture occurs. There's not many people in it, about 1 million. Most of the people are in the cities, such as Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, etc., and you can see they're not in the Murray-Darling. They get their water from other water supply systems. The Murray-Darling is an irrigated agricultural catchment which has been managed at a state level until extremely recently. And so in there's also the Great Artesian Basin, and that's in there. I just wanted to point that out, that it is a big artesian basin, but it isn't the solution to the problem because the water's very hot and very salty and very deep, and all around the rest of that it's a long way. But there is an artesian basin, and some people do use it. Okay, the political challenges of water management in Australia. Australia, in its constitution, which was settled in 1901, borrowed a lot from the American Constitution, but it has this unique term in section 100. The Commonwealth shall not by any law or regulation of trade or commerce abridge the right of a state or the residents therein to the reasonable use of the waters of rivers for conservation or irrigation. So water stayed with the states, even in the Federation, and this abridged the federal government's navigation power. This is what it was set out to do. So the inherent power of navigation the federal government couldn't use to manage water. The water had to stay with the states. It's not as though that wasn't noticed, that was creating an unfair political system. And you can see from these cartoons from around Federation, South Australia's getting a drip in the bucket compared to Victoria, and New South Wales is getting a huge amount. So it was known. These are the 5 epochs of water law, though. 1788 to 1901, we had the state colonies. They were colonies of England, and they had independent legislature. They had power to pass laws for peace, order and good government, and they did it largely with water to develop the land. Built lots of little schemes and big schemes, and generally only thought within their borders. And then in 1901, the federal law, the constitution was passed saying that the water still remains with the states. So 1901 to 1983, we had the period of fiscal federalism where the federal government paid the state governments to do things that the federal government wanted them to do. And with water, that generally just amounted to amounts of money to build dams. Other areas, other things were unified, but the Federation was no power in the federal government to do very much, and they did create the Murray-Darling Basin Commission, but that was very weak in legal power as well. Now, the things that are different are the treaties power in 1983 to 1994. The Commonwealth government used its treaties power to sign treaties, and then with those could enact a law which could supervene a state law, using the same provision as you have in your constitution. The best example of that was the Tasmanian Dams case, where the state passed a law, federal government passed a law to prevent any dams being built in a World Heritage Area, and therefore stopped Tasmanian state building a dam. So we have a history of a lot more power coming to the federal government. Then in 1994 to 2007, we had a process of the Commonwealth created a body called the Council of Australian Governments, and its aim was to try and get some agreement with the states on getting some laws and policies on water management and other things that were usefully similar. And that took place through the cooperative powers. In 2007, it was considered that that wasn't working, mainly because one of the states wasn't doing its part of the bargain, and therefore the Commonwealth, using every possible bit of power it could possibly accrete, passed a Water Act to apply only to the Murray-Darling Basin, which gave the federal government the power to supervene and accredit the states' processes of managing water within their boundaries. The power still remains with the state, but the Commonwealth does have a power to change a state plan if it's in the national interest. It's the first time that term has been used in law, and it gives a very broad power to the Commonwealth. This just shows that the drought, we have, this is all against the background of a drought, but in Australia we've had droughts every 40 years, 1901, 1940, 1980, and now it's a bit lesser. But drought is a common phenomenon, and as I said, the climate change processes and the IPCC's report have only come out in the last 4 or so years. This process about trying to change our water management policies to achieve sustainability was driven by the droughts, but also by other local issues. Okay, so the background is the enduring serious drought. So the Commonwealth enacts the Water Act to apply only to the Murray-Darling Basin, and it uses multiple powers in the Constitution, plus the power to refer, the states have power to refer power to the Commonwealth. The states can give power to the Commonwealth. I know that's unusual, but they can, and they have done it in this case. And the political settlement to achieve that was quite vexed, as you can imagine. One state held out a bit, and that was Victoria, and they were actually given a bit of a bribe in the sense of that scheme you're talking about. They're given a lot of money in order to, they were given federal money in order to do it, to refer the power. So it's there's only 7 states. Remember, it's probably easier to do than in this sort of complicated environment. And then that government lost power, and we had a new government, and the new government strengthened the Water Act and was able to achieve that political settlement more readily. So the Water Act is constitutionally valid. What does it do? It federalises the Murray-Darling Basin in the sense that it gives the federal government power to change a state plan about water allocation in a region if it's not in the national interest. So it imposes another test. It requires that there is a Murray-Darling Basin plan produced, and that will be produced towards the end of this year. It requires natural resource management plans of the states in the Murray-Darling Basin, and it gives the power to manage water in the national interest, or that is, vary a state plan in the national interest, to implement international agreements, which is also something unusual for the US conception of how laws are done. You don't do that, but we do that. And then achieve ecologically sustainable development. And that ecologically sustainable development is the same as the concept from Rio in '92, and it's embedded in our acts. And the ABA paper I gave gives that detail. So the other aspect of this is that the government holds environmental water. The federal government can buy water from a farmer, and then they can hold the water, and they can't resell it, but they can leave it in the river. And this act sets critical human needs as the first priority. So the priorities for water are critical human needs, then to protect the biosphere or the biological diversity in the particular region, so that varies, and then everybody else gets a share of what's left, and that's called the consumptive pool. There's no priority between the users. So the dog food manufacturer and the farmer and the grape grower, there's no priority. No priority, because all of the systems are over-allocated. We didn't ever allocate water on the basis of priority, except in a de facto way, in the sense that once the water was fully allocated, no more could be given. But everybody lines up equally. So the task of the federal government officials or the state government officials is to work out what's the consumptive pool, given that they need to protect the environment, and then everybody in that region now gets a share of the consumptive pool. They don't have a bit of paper that says they have 10 megalitres anymore. They get a share of the pool. And then they're in a water planning area, and that's done under each state's legislation, and they have participated, hopefully, in the process, so they know that the scientists have decided that this aquifer is over-allocated, and there's going to be a general downward trending in amount of water that's in this consumptive pool.
And how are critical human needs defined? What is
That's
that?
just water for the inside use in your house.
For residential?
Yes, so it's very small. In the Murray-Darling, it's not that many people. So
There's a formula for how much is needed for that. They get first dibs on the water, then after that, anybody else that's interested in water?
Each state has some idea about how much is used internally now, because we don't allow people to water their gardens anymore. Nobody's set each region will have to set a figure for that, and it could vary. If it's hotter, you'd expect maybe more, but it's a fairly small amount of water. Only 7% or so of water in Australia is used internally in houses under this definition, because we have, it's all in the urban cities who are getting it from other water supplies areas than this region where there's irrigation. So there is a definition of that, and empirically how it works is the thing that's happening now.
So you don't really have water rights per se like we have
We
here.
don't. We have license.
Everybody's equal, and they get allocated.
They have a license, not a property right in your sense.
They have a license to take water.
Yeah, which can be defeated by the minister of the state at any time.
Okay, now you say droughts are very common in Australia every 4 years.
Every
so
40 years.
Every 40 years.
Every 40 years.
40
We have
years.
a trend, yeah.
I thought you said 4. I was going, my God, that's like constant.
No, every 40.
Every 40 years.
Major droughts.
That is often.
Yeah, major droughts.
Okay.
So that is a very good point, Bill. Here you have a property right in your water with the prior. In Australia, we have never had that. We've had a licence. But a lot of people didn't understand it was a licence. And there was a lot of litigation about it when the various state ministers started reducing water because they found that the aquifer was being overdrawn, and salt and salinity. Both, yes. Yeah, and groundwater is quite used a lot, but most of in the Murray-Darling is surface water. So it is a licence granted by a myriad of state laws over 150 years. And so part of the problem is there are lots of different conditions on the licences. In one part of the southern Murray-Darling, there were 600 different licence types. Victoria had some, South Australia, New South Wales. That is being rationalised, but they were all unified in being a licence. It's just that, and the minister always had power to take them away. So that is a fundamental difference, yes.
I was just going to comment that a critical human need around here for water is enough for coffee. So,
yes.
Does that count as household use?
I hope so. We all need it. So, under the Water Act, the state must produce the water plan in the Murray-Darling. Yeah, how long? 5, good. And then the regional bodies must demonstrate that states must demonstrate that they've done it with appropriate science and consulting the right people. Now, we haven't had any litigation on this yet because the state plans are still being underway. So that's the process. Here are the 56 NRM regions. You'll see there's quite a few in Victoria, and there's each state has them, and those are the macro regions where the plans must be made. So, in summary, once the basin plan is made, we're going to have this type of process. We're going to have water resource plans made under various state laws, and they're going to be lasting for 10 years, and out of them becomes the individual and industry they get their so-called right, but it's a licence. Okay, what's happened? We have changed the social factors around Australian water has changed the industries. There's no doubt about that. And the other point I need to make is that compensation is not given for this process of doing a plan and working out that the sustainable amount that can be taken is less than it is. There's only compensation given if there's a policy change to support a wetland or something, and then the farmers who miss out will get some compensation. Otherwise there won't be. I won't talk about that. The system is complex now because we have international obligations, we have private companies engaged in water supply, which is unlike the US as well, because in '94 we said private sector should be involved in water supply, so it is. And so there's 14 different types of water supply businesses in Australia, which adds another level of complexity. It's simpler here, and I wouldn't move from your system if I were you. I wouldn't put it into... Not that I'm saying the private sector is bad, it just means it's difficult to deal with them. They have different objectives. If we're looking at a long-term sustainable public interest approach, it's probably better to have it managed in the government. But private companies, non-government organisations, local governments, state governments and the Commonwealth. So it's huge. I won't run through sustainability. I'm sure you know what it means. The only thing that is recent is we have a section in our constitution like the takings provision in yours, and there was a place in Murrumbidgee where the farmers lost 70% of the groundwater because of these plans, and the minister said it's over-allocated, everybody loses 70%. So they went to court, the case, ICM, the company went to court, said the questions were the prior licences property, was the reduction a taking? And the answer was no. The reduced licences amount did not constitute a taking within the meaning of the Constitution because it was a licence, not a property right. So we're not going to have that stream of litigation that you've got. So this is what Australia looks like now. This is the Murray-Darling Basin, which is uplifted from the rest of the country and is managed, or the federal government has power to overarch a state plan and say it's not in the national interest to redo it again or just change it. And the rest of the states are run, and the rest of the parts of the states are run under their own laws only. But they all must achieve sustainability. There's a uniformity. The lessons for the US, there was a crisis, and there was no choice but change. Fundamental change is possible, and in fact our system is now quite set up to manage climate change as well, because the minister can say on the basis of the climate change data we think what can be taken out of here is even less. And every time the minister has changed an allocation process in a region, it's been supported by the court in every state. So you can assert a public interest in sustainability. The process has been public and transparent, and that's been critical to its acceptance. So people haven't liked it, but it's been seen as fair. Everybody lost 70%. Interstate bickering has allowed the federal control, yes, and judges can accept change. So that's it.
We have interstate bickering.
Oh, you do? But yes, I think every federation has bickering.
Especially with more states. Well, one question I have for you, and then I know we want to hear from the other panelists. You talked about 70% reductions in water. Is that all by virtue of the drought? Is it because more got allocated towards environmental goals, or...?
It's a bit combination. It would be that the original allocations were just too far too generous. They were based on ignorance, and also there would be environmental goals in that region, which would mean those are the two things coming together.
Very good. Thank you.
Good question.
Do we have another question? Assembly Member Salas?
Yes, so the system is so different than ours in that, if I heard your presentation correctly, is that initially the state's water authority trumped the federal, and yet the states pushed it over to the federal. They gave more power to the federal.
They gave it in this region, yes.
That's absolutely amazing that somebody
But they were
would
bribed.
see that.
Incentivized.
Yes, incentivized.
Incentivized.
Yes.
And then another thing that struck me in a country that is as big as the United States, that you only have 56 natural resource management regions, where, as in the state of California, just in the county of San Diego, you've got 18 different water agencies that have their fingers in the pocket that, are not going to cede any of their rights together. So if you multiply that by just the 58 counties within our state, and then you take it on the national level, it just seems to me that your ability to move and change policy was very much improved just by the fact that you had such large management areas.
In the 56 regions, in the Murrumbidgee there would be 78 local governments. It's still, but what we've said is, you have to use this geographical biophysical region to do your planning, and it's forced them to. But there is still a plethora of bodies with their fingers in the pie, but they have to march. If they're in that region, they have to look at what that plan for that region says. So it's still there, and that's one of the things which will eventually, hopefully, be simplified.
Assemblymember Yamada?
Well, so yes, thank you. So quickly, the planning is done absent the political subdivisions. It's looked upon more as a basin plan. Yes.
It's an natural resource map.
So they're asked, local governments or all of these different groups are asked to not look at the political boundary as much as the physical boundaries.
That's right. And sometimes the natural resources management region intersects the local government region, as it does within the Murray-Darling as well. It intersects the states. So, yes.
Well, we thank you.
Yes, good.
Very good. Thank you. Let's move to our next speaker now, Wendy Martin, the statewide drought coordinator here in California for the Department of Water Resources. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I had a very unique opportunity last year to travel to Australia and participate in an international water study tour to learn about Australia's drought and their management strategies for dealing with it. I've been serving as the statewide drought coordinator for a little over 2 years now, and had, previous to that, reached out to Australia because of the similarities in their hydrology, their weather, their geography, their politics, and their water issues. And so what I'd like to do today is maybe focus, Jennifer gave you a really good background of where they're at from a policy perspective. I came at it from a practical approach. I was looking for answers and came home very excited about the possibilities and the opportunities for California. So I'm going to move through that pretty quickly. You've already seen a slide like this. Australia is in extreme drought. They have seen in the last 13 years their driest conditions ever. This is climate change in Victoria. And they did climate change modeling and planning based on 3 scenarios, low, medium, and high, and those are those curved lines. The line on the bottom is their actual runoff in the Murray-Darling over the last 10 years. So what it shows is that climate change happens very quickly, and you can't forecast very well what's going to happen. But they ended up in a much worse situation than they even planned for in the worst-case scenario. This is Western Australia, Perth, their runoff. This chart really struck me because it looks like a delta outflow chart that we use in California, the extreme variability, but you can see in this chart the step changes that they have experienced in the last 30 years and then in the last 10 to 12 years. This is Sacramento unimpaired runoff, and we have lots of charts like this that show the extreme variability, but one of the things that is interesting is the variability is increasing, but we're seeing a drying trend. It is gradual, but it is, overall we're seeing more of a drying condition, and that is something that we're seeing on virtually every piece of water data that we're coming across. So I was looking for answers, and when I went to Australia, we visited 5 of the 6 states and the nation's capital, got to meet with many of the politicians that were involved in the work that Jennifer was talking about at a very high level, and these are kind of the take-home messages. These are the things that they have done to respond to the extreme drought that they are facing. They are better integrating their water systems. They have modified their water rights or licenses. We call them rights. In Australia, they are licenses. And they have improved the ability to move water and exchange water through water trading. They're looking at improvements in a number of different sectors and have spent a lot of money. The bribe that Jennifer was talking about was really an irrigation reform project that has yielded quite a bit of water conservation. It's actually very striking, the amount of conservation that they've been able to generate from this irrigation efficiency program. These guys know how to do conservation, recycling, and stormwater management. They are world leaders in these areas, and there's much for us to learn in these areas. And they have mastered desalination, which is an area that I think we really need to look at, not as solving the problem, but providing the insurance for increasingly dry conditions. So what are we doing already in California? These are activities that the department is involved in along with other state agencies. The process of integrated, or the policy of integrated regional water management, is really a sound approach. It's diversifying local supplies, reducing dependence on imported water, and this is the vehicle by which we're able to invest in California in conservation, recycling, and stormwater management. We have the 20 by 2020 program, which some of you are familiar with and have heard about, which is essentially a 20% reduction in per capita water use by the year 2020. This year we passed a new dual plumbing standard that allows the use of recycled water, provides building standards for recycled water in commercial buildings, multi-residence buildings, and obviously parks and open space type areas. The model landscape ordinance is targeted for communities to come up with efficient ways to irrigate large expanses of landscaping. And then we do quite a bit of monitoring and data analysis. It's actually quite good on a worldwide standard. Whoops. Okay, what happened here?
Just added to ocean desalination.
All right. Well, that's weird. Okay, so what are the opportunities for California? You've heard a lot of, I'm sorry, what? There is a kangaroo up there. How can you talk about Australia without, and we actually had to pitch a fit on our trip because we saw lots of boardrooms and a lot of politicians' offices, but it wasn't until the very end of the trip where we said it would be a shame to travel all this way and never see a kangaroo. So that's actually my photo op with the kangaroo. So what are the opportunities for California, and what do we really need to think about? And some of these are a bit trite, but I think it probably warrants a revisiting. Metering is something that we just have to do. And metering is in the works. A lot of places in California are metered, but right now there still are significant parts of the state that are unmetered. And you cannot measure your effectiveness in water use, just like energy use, unless you have a meter. So if we were to look at something that we could do to help get us further down the road, it would be to accelerate some of those metering programs. And I'm not going to give you any easy answers here, unfortunately. I realize there are reasons why things are the way they are, but the reality is we will not be effective in evaluating our per capita water use until we are metered. Just like people can look at their energy bill and compare what they did last month to this month to a year ago, we have to be able to do the same thing for water. And we are shameful in the volume of water that we use in this state. It is embarrassing. When we talk to people in other places around the world, we are so far off the chart in per capita water use, people fall out of their chairs when they hear how much water we use. And I think in Australia, what we heard is the per capita water use varied around the country depending on the stage of conservation they were in. In places that were very, very dry, like South Australia when we were there, it was about 30 gallons per person per day. Other places where they were using more water, restrictions had been relaxed a little bit, they were up in the 40 to 50 gallons a day. Our 20% by 2020, right now the statewide average for California ranges, depending on where you were at, some places are more conservative than others, but the statewide average is about 180 to 200 gallons per person per day. And so when you say that and you're sitting next to an Australian, they fall out of their chair. How can we sustain that? Now, one of the challenges is we're not all metered, so we don't know definitively. And there are differences in how people calculate per capita water use that can influence that. But I guess my point is 20% reduction in per capita is great, but it will still be a very high water use on an international perspective, and there is more opportunity to conserve. It was interesting, the next point on dual flush toilets and water efficient appliances. I actually had one of the managers at DWR ask me what a dual flush toilet was, and that was synonymous. I was shocked because it's not commonplace. You would be hard pressed in California to find a dual flush toilet. In Australia,
They've been mandatory since 1975.
in Australia,
Every toilet is dual flush.
you cannot find a non-dual flush toilet. These are.
Saves quite a bit of water.
It saves a lot of water. It's like these are very simple things. I realize they take money, and we're talking about urban conservation, but on the grand scheme of things, it's not very much money compared to some of the other things that we're talking about.
It doesn't cost the owner a lot more to have a dual flush toilet. It's marginal. Really, you just got two buttons, so it's not.
No, it's operator error is not a problem with dual flush toilets. Most people can master this.
Yes.
I do have one question on this slide, and then we really do need to continue on ocean desalination. I know you said that they do it quite well in terms of cost effectiveness. How are they doing? Because here in California and other places, we know how to do that. Technology's there. The big question is it cost effective given other ways that we get drinkable water?
Desalinated water in Australia is also very expensive. Probably not as expensive as here because they have figured out how to do it well. So they don't spend infinite amounts of time restudying, redoing, redesigning, relitigating. They just go build it, and they do it in an environmentally sensitive way. But that being said, it is the cap for the cost of water supply improvements. But every state and every major city in Australia within the next 2 years will have a desalination plant as part of their water supply. And that is their insurance. That is a highly reliable supply. So even it is very expensive, it is highly reliable. So it's your insurance. As things get drier and other sources diminish or come and go, you've got something that will carry you through, and it sets the cap. You don't spend money on anything that's more expensive than a desal plant. And everything that's less expensive, you go after in a really aggressive way. So just a couple other things here. Our new plumbing standards specifically exclude single-family residences. And I think that's something that we can fix pretty easily. People around the world dual plumb single-family residences. It allows you to use water that's not purified to drinking water standards to flush your toilet. I mean, that's as crass as that is. Do you want to spend all that money? Do you want to have the purest water in the world go down your toilet bowl? I don't think so. I think we have other options.
We don't let people water their gardens, though, with our potable water.
That's right. That's right.
So gardens are dead.
Okay, so here are some lessons learned. This is what I learned from the state of Victoria. The holdout in the federal, the lowest cost water supply is your existing water supply. And that means you recycle, you conserve, you reuse, you manage, you use it and use it and use it. Environmental sustainability is key, and Jennifer talked about that. Climate change happens faster than you expect. You have to bring the levels of government together. Pricing of water is important, and in some cases, it takes a true crisis to be able to make some of these changes. And then just one more, recommendations from John Ringham. John Ringham is the COO of SA Water, which is the large water utility in South Australia, where Jennifer comes from. And he was very candid with us about his role in managing drought in South Australia. And these are what he would have done differently. He would have done more sooner before the crisis hits. And he said you have to be willing to make the call early. Save as much water as you can early on in the process so that you have that water for the future. And be brave enough to be conservative about how you use water. And planning and innovation are wonderful drivers. And we did see that throughout our trip in Australia, that innovation is really working to their benefit. So with that, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next panelist is Barry Nelson, the Senior Water Policy Analyst for the Natural Resources Defense Council. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Chairman Solorio and members of the Select Committee. I've been working on water issues in California for about 25 years, and NRDC works both extensively on water issues and on climate issues. And really for the last decade, increasingly, our work on water issues have been shaped by recognition of the climate challenges that we're going to be facing in the future. And the lessons from Australia are very applicable for California. We need to look at those lessons and decide how to learn from them and to apply those lessons in a way that reflects the different circumstances that California does face. I provided your staff with copies of a report we wrote several years ago called In Hot Water that addresses not just the water management impacts of climate change, but what we can do about that. I'd like to just mention two of the impacts that are particularly important for California. One you've heard about, one you haven't. The first one is impacts to precipitation. People think about climate and water, they often think about the loss of snowpack. But quite possibly the more important potential impact of climate change is that California is likely to be drier in the future than it has been in the past. And Wendy's slide showed that trend is already well underway. The Department of Water Resources reports have now for the last several years said that California is likely to be drier as a result of climate change. The U.S. Climate Change Science Program concluded that California is likely to be 5 to 10% drier within the next half century, and the Colorado River Basin, which is a very important source for Southern California. That basin was predicted by the U.S. Climate Change Science Program to be 10 to 25% drier than it is today. Those are tremendously important numbers because when you look around California, we basically have hit some meaningful limits on every one of our major river basins. And these lessons tell us that, as in the case of Australia, we should be expecting in the future that our existing systems will produce less water than they have traditionally produced. A tremendously important lesson. The other impact is one that you didn't hear about, but equally direct water-related impact of climate change, and that's sea level rise. We've seen sea level rise of 7 inches at the Golden Gate in the last century. We're going to see more in the coming century than we saw in the last. It has tremendously important implications for water supply in the Delta, but also for the 400,000 people who live in the Delta and for a web of infrastructure that includes highways, rail lines, aqueducts, power lines, gas lines, a web of essential infrastructure in the Delta, and that system is vulnerable because of a combination of sea level rise, subsidence, and earthquakes. UC Davis and the Public Policy Institute of California have predicted the potential for severe damage in the Delta if we continue on the status quo. And the potential impacts from catastrophic failure in the Delta has been described as being the potential of being California's Katrina. So between those, the water supply impacts from reduced precipitation and the potential impacts of sea level rise, those are just two of the potential impacts of climate change on our water resources. We really need to pay attention to these issues. I'd like to talk about 4 specific recommendations that we think we need to focus on. The first is that for the first 100 years of California's statehood, we focused on a simple strategy to meet our water needs, and that was to go out and find another river. Well, unfortunately, at this point, we're basically out of new rivers. And the rivers that we have tapped into are likely to produce less water. But some of the tools that you've heard about are going to be relatively less affected by climate change. The 4 tools that we've identified as priorities are urban and agricultural conservation, water recycling, groundwater cleanup and improved groundwater management, and urban stormwater capture. And what's interesting about those 4 tools is that they're all efficiency-related tools. They're all less affected by climate change than relying on your local river. And they have an enormous potential to generate new water. We looked at the aggressive potential of those 4 tools, and the number we came up surprised us, and that was, if we look at the aggressive estimates of those 4 tools, it's in the neighborhood of 10 million acre-feet of water. And just by way of contrast, that's more than we pump from the Bay Delta system and the Colorado River system. Those 4 tools are by far the largest source of potential water supply for California. They generate an enormous amount of water cost-effectively that reduces our vulnerability to climate change, takes pressure off the ecosystem, and just because of the unique circumstances in California, conservation can save an enormous amount of energy, which in turn helps reduce our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions.
One question for you on that list, being that we're right next to the ocean as Australia is, water desalination, why isn't that on your list? Just because of cost, environmental concerns?
Cost, and can I get to that in just a moment? You're absolutely right. I will come back to that issue in a moment. That is a key question for us as a state in terms of where we invest in the future. You've heard about the 20 by 2020 program. What I want to leave you with is that the tools that I mentioned have an enormous amount of acceptance. If you look at the San Diego County Water Authority's plan for their future water supply, the City of Los Angeles' plan, the Southern California Business Community's plan for future water supply, they all rely on basically the same tools. I'll come back to desalination because that is the variable in the list. There really is a recognition that this is where our new water is going to come from. And we're only now really starting to turn our policy tools around to get the most out of those systems. So how do we get the most out of those tools? The second recommendation I'd like to leave you with is integration and regional planning. It's possible for a city like Los Angeles to go out and build the Los Angeles Aqueduct. It's one piece of infrastructure by one agency. But maximizing the tools that I just mentioned require a level of regional cooperation that's really different. One agency may have a wastewater treatment plant, but they don't have a groundwater basin to store recycled water in. One water agency may be interested in urban water conservation, but you can't maximize water conservation without the authorities that local cities and counties hold to change water codes and so forth, to change building codes and so forth. So in order to get the most out of these new tools, we're really going to have to emphasize regional integration, regional cooperation, more than we have in the past when we were primarily relying on old-fashioned large infrastructure programs. We really do have to emphasize regional cooperation. Fortunately, in places like the Santa Ana River watershed, there are real examples of places where California, certainly in the U.S., where California is really showing how that can be done and produce some really innovative solutions like groundwater desalination that's happening at a pretty substantial scale in the Santa Ana River watershed. The third issue I want to touch on is economics, and back to your question. Water managers have many more choices to invest in than they had a century ago. You can invest in the four tools that I mentioned, plus desalination, surface supply, groundwater supply, lots of different choices. We think that given the number of choices and given the pressure on state and federal budgets, economics and financing are going to be a key to making progress. The CalFed program a decade ago failed in part because of unrealistic expectations about public financing. We think we need to be more realistic, that in the future more water supply is going to be paid for at the local level by the beneficiaries, and that's the difference. And recognizing that up front is the difference between writing a plan that sits on the shelf and writing a plan that gets implemented. So back to desalination. Desalination is a technology that really is, as Wendy said, at the upper end of the economics of water supply. A lot of communities look at desalination and over time decide, this debate is happening in Marin County right now. There's been a real interest in desalination. It's expensive. And when they look at alternative water supplies, the alternative supplies look more cost effective. There will be desalination in California for the reasons that were already mentioned, with an emphasis on, and groundwater desalination is already happening. But the alternative supplies that we have in California, the abundance of waste we have in California compared to Australia means we have a lot more cost-effective water from other sources. We think that's where the majority of our investments are going to come from. There will be investments in desal, but the majority we think will be elsewhere. So the third point is the importance of economics and financing. CalFed didn't have a credible financing plan. They wrote an ambitious plan that simply sat on the shelf because they didn't have a credible way to finance that program. And water agencies made different choices in terms of where they invested. The fourth point I'd like to make is a point regarding environmental protection. And Jennifer made that point as well, that we need to make sure we build environmental protection into our climate adaptation strategies. There's a lot we can do there. We need to do habitat restoration in the Delta to take pressure off of a Delta ecosystem that is really in trouble. We can remove migration barriers to help salmon reach colder water in higher watersheds as a way of of helping salmon populations recover. Those really are not just environmental issues, they're economic issues. The fishing industry in California has been shut down for 2 years. We're suffering hundreds of millions of dollars of damage a year because of the loss of that fishery. And inevitably, environmental problems eventually become restrictions on water supply and other activities. We need to try to get in front of that in terms of maintaining environmental protections and doing restoration. Those are the 4 major recommendations we'd have. Looking at, I was recently asked by a water manager not to call those 4 tools I mentioned, efficiency, wastewater recycling, groundwater management, urban stormwater capture, not to call those alternative supplies anymore. That's how we used to describe them. And an urban water management manager recently said to me, stop calling those alternative water supplies. They're not alternatives. That's our backbone strategy for the coming 50 years. So investing in those strategies is a key. Regional cooperation, critically important. Economics and financing, and then finally making sure that we try to get in front of environmental management issues rather than really allowing those issues to force our hand. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Next, I'm going to call up the next panel. We have a couple of district representatives that are going to talk about, from a Northern and Southern California standpoint, what we are doing in the area of drought and conservation and looking towards the future. We have Brandon Goshi, the Resources and Planning Manager for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and Randy Canus, the Special Assistant to the General Manager at the East Bay Municipal Utilities District. Welcome.
Morning or afternoon. I'll get started as soon as we get that up. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for having us here today to talk to you about a look at how a water agency like the Metropolitan Water District incorporates climate change and other uncertainties into utility planning. So here's an example that we can give you of what's going on the ground in Southern California. By way of background, the Metropolitan Water District is a large regional agency created in 1928 through an act of the legislature, bringing together some of the coordinated efforts that you just heard may be important for addressing large-scale change. We cover 6 counties, 6 large counties, 5,200 square miles in Southern California, with a total population base of close to 20 million people today. That's half of the state's population. Large regional economy supported by Southern California. Metropolitan Water District meets about half of the total retail demands in Southern California, about 4 million acre-feet in total, 2 million acre-feet roughly from Metropolitan Water District. We have 26 member agencies, and those 26 member agencies cover about 300 retail water agencies for our region. The sources of water for Southern California are quite diverse. You can see that throughout the state, Metropolitan and its service area gets its water from locally supplied water, starting down on the left, from groundwater sources, from surface water diversions. We are very much have moved water recycling forward and have probably, for a district, the largest conservation effort in the state. In 1928, we were created primarily to construct the Colorado River Aqueduct. Metropolitan is a contract right holder to bring water to Southern California from the Colorado River Aqueduct. The city of Los Angeles, one of our member agencies, built the Los Angeles Aqueduct in the early 1900s. Metropolitan became a state water contractor in the 1960s to import water from the California State Water Project. Notable about this is that climate change and uncertainty affects Metropolitan in an interesting way because of our diverse watersheds and areas. Metropolitan currently has a 3-tiered approach for looking at the uncertainties due to climate change and what that may bring us. And so these 3 tiers are implementation of programs and policies that take into consideration what the future may look like. So as I've already mentioned, we're heavily into the conservation, storage, and recycling in terms of providing incentives to our member agencies to make sure that those projects that are traditionally more expensive become competitive next to just purchasing metropolitan water supplies. We are starting to lead in terms of energy efficiency plans. We just completed a 1 megawatt solar plant at one of our Skinner treatment plant to help take the energy load off of that plant. The Bay Delta Conservation Plan is an example of comprehensive look at improving the situations in some of our diverse water supplies. And one thing that's really important here is our integrated resources plan, and I'll show you a slide on that, on how we've tried to diversify our resources to make the risks a little bit smaller in each of those areas for us. The other two areas I'm going to cover are knowledge sharing and research. Climate change is a new and broad area for most water agencies. And one of the main things I'm going to talk about in the next two slides is our collaboration with something called the Water Utility Climate Alliance, and I'll get into that in detail. And then the third tier is basically quantification of current research. In other words, getting smarter about the information that is out there and how it applies to our water agencies and how we can apply that information. This is the slide on what we've tried to accomplish through our water plans. Starting in the early 1990s, Metropolitan Water District would have looked at having dry year supplies that were heavily dependent on its imported water supplies. I apologize for the acronyms here: Colorado River Aqueduct and the State Water Project. We would have looked at heavily relying on those in dry years without much S&T as storage and transfers, and a limited amount of conservation at the time and local resources there. As a result of our IRP in the 1990s, we shifted that focus to starting to invest in, you see the local supply wedge has increased. That's from the investments in water recycling, groundwater recovery, the recovery of formerly contaminated groundwater basins, those types of activities to increase the locally sustainable water supplies. Conservation efforts have grown to where we're saving about 800,000 acre-feet a year, more than what we would have if we hadn't taken any action at all. And as you already know, we were strong sponsors of the 20 by 2020 legislation for increasing conservation savings. And that storage and transfer slide has increased. Metropolitan has invested in what is now over 5 million acre-feet of storage capacity to manage its water supplies, so that dry year emphasis on the State Water Project is much, much smaller than what it would have been had we not taken those actions.
Can I just ask a quick question? So, in a way, you don't necessarily have apples to apples unless we know the total amount of water you used in 1990 compared to today, 20 years later. Because if you apply the percentages, then you'll get the total acre feet. So do you know what that is?
Well, I think maybe I can characterize it this way. Conservation and water recycling comprises about 1 million acre-feet of quantified savings or reduced water use over what we would have done had we not used that.
But do you know
1 million.
But do you know what your total acre-feet was in 1990 compared to, say, 2010? How much? Obviously,
they're actually close to the same. So where we would have seen growth to about 5 million acre-feet, right. In total now we're only seeing demands of about 4 million acre-feet. Okay. So I think, that's where you're going?
Yeah, if
okay.
I'll talk to you later. Thank you.
Okay. This is the slide on Water Utility Climate Alliance, and this is our main thrust when it comes to learning and adapting to climate change uncertainty. Metropolitan Water District is one of 10 nationwide agencies who represent 40 million Americans to work together to improve research on the impacts of climate change on water utilities, so taking the information and trying to distill it down to water specifics. Developing adaptation approaches for climate change, that's very important in the planning arena, and then developing greenhouse gas reduction strategies or other energy mitigation strategies, sharing that information among the water utilities and trying to create informal best practices at this point of how greenhouse gas and energy use can be addressed. So this Water Utility Climate Alliance, I think in the last couple of years, has made some large strides, and I think those strides are, we're a regular partner with federal agencies like NOAA and with other large water agency affiliations like AMWA. They're regular participants in our coordinated efforts. Our entire WUCA agencies get invitations to workshops with these federal agencies and climate modeling centers where we try to get common information on the same page so that we can use it appropriately. We have two really big accomplishments in terms of reports. One is a report that was just released on climate modeling. It's an evaluation of the global climate models and the science that's available for its sufficiency for use in water planning. And so it discusses different challenges that there are in implementation of that, and then also explores and makes suggestions on future climate modeling efforts, what type of data is important to an end-use community like the water agencies. Second, which is the second thrust of what we try to focus on, is a report on decision support planning methods and their ability to incorporate uncertainty due to climate change. So on one hand, you know climate change information is uncertain. The second thing is you need to develop methods to process that information in the water world. And so this report examined 8 different planning approaches for its suitability in looking at the existing data. So for Metropolitan, how does it break down for our region? It breaks down this way. Our goal is to plan for an uncertain future where climate change is one of those uncertainties, but we have a lot of uncertainties: demographic growth, energy costs. And so what our goal is to use decision planning support methodologies to identify key vulnerabilities and risk to our current plans, to identify contingency actions that can be taken in the face of these risks, to assess the feasibility of these contingency actions through what we call low risk, no regret actions. So what are the foundational steps that we can take and lay out to prepare ourselves to implement, so that when some of these vulnerabilities or uncertainties come to pass, we won't get caught cold and have to start from that point. And then the last is to utilize what we learn on science and decision support and develop meaningful triggers so that we know when to implement some of these contingency plans. That's the end of my presentation. Be happy to take questions.
No, thank you. And I'm particularly intrigued by this concept of low risk, no regret actions. Because I know when we were working on the education stuff and looking at the uncertainty of what the feds are doing with education policy, one of the things we kind of struggled with is how much of this stuff should we be doing already? Right. And there's always kind of a question about what that is, but that is a good way of thinking that we need to, whether it be in education or in this case, water planning, doing those things that are, low risk. And
if I could give one short concrete example of what that would be, there was a lot of talk about ocean desalination. Ocean desalination is a potential contingency action against some of these uncertainties. A low risk, no regret action would be feasibility studies, research on large-scale ocean intakes and discharge, feasibility of land acquisition, but not the construction and operation of a plant before its time. And that's mainly our focus.
Very good. Thank you.
Do you have any extra copies of those reports?
I don't have. I'll be happy to leave these, and you guys can do that. There's a website that I can provide to you, which is www.wucaonline.com, where you can get these, and I would be happy. And
we'll get links to the committees or copies.
We would be happy to distribute these to you.
Good idea. Assemblymember Yamada.
Thank you, Chair Solorio. Very quickly, I just wanted to ask you about WUCA a little bit more from an observational point. From what we heard from our friends from Australia, it appeared that the Australian discussion began to become more federalized. And do you see this as somewhat of an alignment in that thought process?
Less so. I think in the Australian example, you had a federal government whose water resources stretched across these boundaries. In the WUCA construct, you'll see that it's nationwide. New York Department of Environmental Protection is part of it. We have entirely disparate water supplies with no connection, where the goal here is to take the geographically different locations and learn from each other and work together to learn more.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Randy Knos with the East Bay Municipal Utilities District. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Solorio, committee members. I'd like to describe to you what East Bay MUD has been doing in response to climate change, and note for you at the outset that there are ways in which I think there are similarities to what MET is doing and what the presentation you heard, and then there are some differences as well, because we are a Northern California utility, and historically we have relied on a single source of water to serve our customers. In addition, we are a retail water agency. We serve 1.3 million Californians in Alameda and Contra Costa counties. Assembly Member Buchanan represents a substantial portion of our service area. So we have about 350,000 separate accounts that we serve. That is residential accounts and business accounts. So we have a direct relationship between all of these customers, with these customers. Historically, East Bay Mud has relied upon its water rights on the McCollum River for about 95% of the water that we serve our customers in the East Bay. And what we have learned, what we are learning, is that climate change holds a lot of uncertainty for the Sierra snowpack. And the Sierra snowpack is our great reservoir where that water comes from that we are able to treat and serve to our customers. And what we have learned is that over the past 50 years that the average temperature, the average high and low temperatures are gradually getting warmer in the McCollum watershed. And so that is telling us we need to adapt. We need to develop a more diverse water supply system in order to meet the needs of the future. East Bay Mud is very proud of the fact that over the last 10 years, we've observed this growing science of global warming, and we were among the very first utilities to support then Assembly Member Fran Pavley's AB 1493 and AB 32. I recall back in 2002 and in those early years being asked repeatedly, why does a water utility care about this legislation? This deals with air emissions. This doesn't affect you at all, and having to go through the lesson of explaining how this absolutely affects our water supply and has huge implications for our future. So this is an issue that we are grappling with, both in terms of adapting our water supply for the future, looking to how we diversify our water supply system. And as part of that, we are looking at a potential desal project in partnership with the City of San Francisco, the Santa Clara Valley Water Utility, and Contra Costa Water District, the four utilities that serve about 3/4 of the Bay Area, are investigating a desal plant that could serve as many as 500,000 residential customers if constructed. The jury is still out on the costs of that desal project and the environmental impacts, but we know we must diversify. We're also looking at partnerships with communities that have capacity in their groundwater basins to store groundwater, and to enter into collaborative partnerships where we would leave water, we would contribute water, we would pay water for the right to store in those basins. Not an easy issue. A lot of the rural communities, a lot of the communities in the Central Valley are deeply suspicious of a partnership with the large urban utilities from coastal California and what that could mean for their ability to pump water in future years. But we're absolutely committed to making those partnerships work and encouraging and achieving better regional groundwater management programs, and a partnership between different water agencies in storing water underground is an area where we look to the legislature for help, for leadership, and to establish a set of rules that create the confidence in the rural communities that they will be protected.
So right now, do you have any existing agreements, or I guess better asked, are you doing this already or still in planning?
Mr. Solorio, for 19 years, we have been meeting with some of the water officials and elected board members from water districts in San Joaquin County, trying to forge a partnership and things move slowly. There's a lot of concern and a lot of as I mentioned.
You're in year 19 or 20 of that dialogue.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But we're pledged to make it work. And I really believe that there is a role for the legislature to help create the kind of confidence in our rural communities where they can feel secure that in entering into such a partnership, that their water rights will be protected and their ability to pump will be protected in the future. And so that will be an important part of the future. East Bay Mud did join the climate registry. We, to the best of our knowledge, were the first water and wastewater utility to join the registry. That means we are monitoring our greenhouse gas emissions and reporting on such and looking for every opportunity to reduce such. My board in 2007 adopted a goal of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 10% by the year 2015. Over the last 2.5 years, we've achieved a 7.5% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions. So my board is contemplating raising that number, revisiting the issue and increasing that target to try and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by an even higher percentage. Because we are a wastewater agency as well as a water agency, we have learned in the last 6 years that there's many opportunities to generate energy from organic wastes. And so we have been working to generate energy from the methane gas, which is a byproduct of our wastewater treatment systems, and put that energy to use. Today, we generate over 90% of the energy that we use at our wastewater treatment plant, and our goal is to have that facility be entirely self-sufficient with the energy we generate in the coming years. We are also now collecting organic waste materials, in some cases trucked from the chicken processing plants in the Central Valley down to our wastewater treatment plant in Oakland, and that organic material is very, very energy rich. And we can generate energy from that. We are entering into a program to also segregate food wastes from restaurants, and we've not yet done it with residences, with individual homes, but that's the next generation of being able to take that food waste and separate it out and also use that as a source of energy. So there are many, many opportunities in terms of our waste materials and how we can generate energy, which is a mitigation. I talked earlier about adaptation, finding new ways of providing water. Well, the other part of our climate change program and our greenhouse gas emission program is to reduce use of carbon emitting energy. Conservation. In your testimony earlier today, there was quite a bit of talk of conservation. Conservation is a great tool. Conservation is both an adaptation tool, it's a new supply, but it's a mitigation as well, because the more you conserve, the less you have to generate electricity to treat water and to move water. And that's also true for the customer. That's also true for our customers. We've now a program where we go out to our businesses. We've had a good deal of success with our residential customers, and now the next frontier is working with business customers to help them understand that by investing in a new piece of equipment, they reduce water consumption, but they also reduce energy consumption. It becomes a twofer for schools, for restaurants, for industrial businesses. And the potential is great to also reduce greenhouse gas emissions in terms of our customers' water use. We've converted all of our vehicles. We are a retail agency, as I mentioned earlier. We have lots of accounts, so we have a fleet of vehicles where our customer service representatives go out and serve the needs of our customer base, we have converted all of those vehicles to hybrid vehicles, as part of our program of mitigating and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We are looking to install photovoltaic facilities at every one of our facilities, particularly where we use energy, so that we can generate energy on site and make use of that. We have installed turbines in our aqueduct pipes to generate power through the movement of water throughout our system. So in every aspect of our utility, we have staff whose responsibility it is to find ways of reducing energy use, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and also find new sources of water to help diversify our system. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you or your committee members may have.
No, that's very good. I really appreciate kind of the boots on the ground approach of what we're doing and what the future looks like. And Randy, you made a real good case of the connection between water and energy, and the climate change from the emissions from all this power we generate. So well done. And any questions from my colleagues? No. Talk a little bit just from the East Bay. Yeah, you probably see Assemblymember Buchanan, as you know, she advocates often for your ideas and concerns. Can you talk a little bit in the Bay Area again from the Southern California perspective? A lot of us think we've been conserving water tremendously, and from time to time we hear that most Northerners aren't measuring their water and don't have as much of a concern. Well, there in your area, what are the sentiments on water conservation, and how much is being done in water conservation?
Mr. Chairman, you're putting me in a very precarious position here to critique my own community, but I think
just describe. I'm not asking for.
I think honestly, we in Northern California, we're blessed with abundant water rights historically, and so we were not compelled the way our colleagues in Southern California were to have to stretch their water supplies and use it and reuse it and reuse it again. But I can tell you we are catching up fast. We are catching up fast. East Bay MUD's recycled water program, now about 7% of our water supply is recycled water. We are investing more heavily in that. As I mentioned earlier, 4 of the large Bay Area agencies are partnering on a desal project and looking for additional ways to be more and more efficient. We're very proud of our conservation program. Assemblymember Buchanan asked earlier, what water use 15, 20 years ago versus water use today. That's a difficult question to answer because water demand varies from year to year depending on climate conditions. You have dry years and your customers use more water and less water, but generally speaking, our average annual demand for East Bay MUD 15 to 20 years ago was about 20% higher than it is today. About 20% higher than it is today. And we're certainly not alone in achieving those savings. I know Metropolitan and many of the Southern California communities have had a similar success, but I think we're proud of our efforts in water conservation, and I think in the area of recycled water, it's probably the area where Southern California has been a leader, and Northern California is following.
No, but I would compliment you because I think you've been doing a lot of good work in your agency just because it's the right thing to do, not because you've had the necessities that we have in Southern California. So the water conservation that you have done, as well as with the tremendous ability to reduce your energy costs, is to be commended. Assemblymember Buchanan.
I'd like to just address that briefly because when I talk to some of my colleagues for Southern California, that the same it comes up, and while we know Sacramento is not on water meters, and nothing changed in the legislation, so they still don't have to be on water meters till 2025, and I believe the same is true in Fresno. In the Bay Area, we've been on water meters forever. And when we talk about rationing, I happen to live on the side of the East Bay Mud where it's warm. And we have very high rates, and even the last 3 years have been on water rationing. And I can go back 2 decades where we've been on water rationing. So, and I was involved in a project in our school district where 11,000 homes. The approvals were in 1992, where they brought in the 2-pipe system. So I was talking to a colleague in Dana Point where, much of the 2-pipe system depends on whether you're old or new. You can't go into the city of Los Angeles and run dual pipes, but when new projects are being developed, whether it's Northern California or Southern California, they're being run with the dual pipes where the irrigation water you're using. City parks, it's all being done with recycled water. The water that actually goes into the building is the new water. So, unfortunately, what we have in the legislature, and I think not just in the legislature but with people in general, is people in Northern California think Southern California wants their water, and they're going to water their, golf courses, this, that, or whatever, and they're not recycling or conserving. And people in Southern California think the same is true in Northern California. And the reality is you have some pockets like Sacramento or Fresno, and maybe they should have been addressed in the legislation. But for the most part, particularly when you get into the urban areas, I mean, people have been recycling. Marin has, San Francisco, Contra Costa, Alameda, the East Bay. I mean, those areas have been conserving for a long time, and as a result, I can tell you as a ratepayer, our rates are very, very high.
Mr. Chairman, may I make one final comment? Certainly know that in the last few months there has been controversy with regard to how quickly AB 32 is implemented. But I hope you and the committee members here today have seen from the presentations that you've received from 2 water utilities, North and South, that as it relates to water management, as it relates to how we deliver water to our customers, that there really is no controversy with regard to implementing a program to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to diversify our supplies. This is really a win-win situation in terms of how we manage water in California.
I appreciate that, and just kind of, I think, as we start to, wrap up this hearing, one of the things I appreciated hearing from the Southern California experience is, a lot of these water discussions really had always been about how do we move water from where it's plentiful to where it's needed, whether it be, the cities or farm areas, where we should be talking more about sustainability in terms of, ensuring that we have, adequate amounts of water, as well as having contingency plans for the unknowns, whether it be, drought, the economy, climate change. And, I'm real proud that we do have regional agencies in both Southern and Northern California that are being mindful, because I think, in people's homes, around the kitchen table, we all have different perceptions of what other parts of our own county or parts of our state are doing or not doing with respect to water conservation. So I think this discussion has really added to definitely the knowledge of the legislators to hear from the dais as well as in their offices and others watching this hearing, that it's been helpful to the debate and our future considerations about how to conserve water and ensure there's water for a long time to come in California. Any other closing thoughts or comments from anybody?
Well,
Maria Yamada.
Thank you. Just very quickly, I wanted to echo your statements, because it's really clear that, water wars have been raging in the state for, 150, 200 years, and will continue unless we learn from each other. And I think we do have a lot to learn about how different parts of the state are addressing, this common crisis. I just want to put in a plug, Davis, where many of us live, and those that work in this building. I think a lot of the constituents, understand that We have put meters in the Davis area, I don't know how many years ago, but unless you have some way of measuring where you've been, you won't know where you need to go. So maybe we'll find some legislation to shake up Sacramento.
Yeah, and
So thank you.
And one of your able constituents is, the consultant to this committee, Alf
That
Branch.
is correct.
Thank
That's
you,
why
Alf,
I have
for
to
all your-
behave myself
all your help,
because
yes.
there's a lot of constituents
He's a voter.
in this building.
He's
That's
a voter.
right.
Many of the audience are voters, so yes.
That's right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Cannon, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I obviously when they talk about water being the new oil, it's definitely true. It's no longer an unlimited resource. It's a scarce resource, and we're going to have to deal with global warming in a way that we can capture runoff and store it and use water differently. I myself am particularly intrigued in what people from the 5 counties have talked about, but that is, how do we deal with this on a regional basis? Because, you could have everyone having their own plans when water was abundant and no one had to worry about limiting the use. But now that we all recognize that there's a limited supply and we're fighting over it now and it's only going to become more intense in the future, I think we need to talk about regional sustainability. I think we need to talk about how we work together, and we need to talk about what all of our options are, because I view this as a shared sacrifice and a common good question, because it really shouldn't be a north or south or a west coast or central valley issue, because we're going to need water to sustain agriculture. I think all of us want that to continue as an industry. At the same time, when I look at the projected population growth that we talk about from 38 million to 50 million, I think most of that population growth is probably going to occur in more of your urban, suburban areas, and the jobs are probably going to be in manufacturing or services industries. So we're going to have a way to shift water there. And some of it's going to come from, recycling and other uses, and some of it's going to come from everybody conserving. But and I'm sure the discussions will probably go on long after all of us have left the legislature. But to the extent we can begin those discussions and do some longer-term planning, I appreciate that. I think the problem is, all of you know where I've stood on the bond, but it's much bigger than what we're talking about. We're talking about a strategy that's got to take us through, the next millennium, actually. So thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Salas.
Yes, this has been a very good hearing, and I think that with all the challenges that we face, and with knowing that water rates are going to increase, and no matter what we do, whether we have all the recommendations that have been put forth, about recycling and conservation and cleanup, just the fact that we do have a growing population and a higher demand for water is going to mean that water rates inevitably will go up no matter what we do to bring new systems and new paradigms online for using our water. But that really creates opportunities for us, because one of the things is that the price point is what is going to change the behavior of people and how they value water. And we've seen that with the conservation methods or the conservation efforts that have taken place in San Diego County, for example. I have to say that probably about 80% of the conservation is due to the rate increase and not by the public service messages that we've been sending out. And people are having to make choices and decisions about where their money goes, and so they're making different choices on the way that they're landscaping and a whole number of areas, and that's going to be the wave of the future. And I think that we are going to change the way that we utilize water, and it will come in line with the rest of the world and how they view water. When you look at the gallons per person, 30 gallons per person per day that were used in Australia, for example, and are almost 200 gallons a day that we utilize. And really, what she was talking about with the 30 gallons of water a day, my niece was in Africa with the Peace Corps, and she was limited to 19 liters of water a day. So this is the way that the rest of the world lives in a different way, in a different manner than we do, and we can still have a good lifestyle that's no discomfort to us using water more wisely. And so I view this as an opportunity for change. We don't like paying more for water, but it's going to be a reality. Also, the development of the future too, as we get more people, a denser population is also going to give us opportunities to use water wisely with smart growth policies and more densities in buildings and the way that you reuse and you recycle. So I just want to thank Chair Solorio for having this very important discussion, and I think that the people of California are going to step up to the plate, and we're going to have some changes in the way that we do things, but I don't think it's going to be change that's going to really put out the quality of life that we have here in the state of California.
Well, thank you to my colleagues, and thank you for everybody that's been listening in today. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.